Welcome to the Lazy CEO podcast, where Jim Schlexer, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schlexer. I am your host, and I am the CEO of the CEO Project. Today, we have an amazing human being and an incredible leader. We have Kim, KC. She'll tell you what that means later, Campbell, who's a retired Air Force colonel, has served in the Air Force for more than 24 years as a fighter pilot and a senior military leader. She's flown more than 100 combat missions, protecting troops on the ground in both Iraq and Afghanistan. As a senior military leader, Kim has led hundreds of airmen at home and abroad in deployed locations around the world. Most recently, Kim served as a director of the Center of Character and Leadership Development at the Air Force Academy. Kim is now managing director of Victory Strategies, where she's the leadership coach and a keynote speaker. She's also the author of Flying in the Face of Fear, a Fighter Pilot's Lessons on Leading with Courage. Kim, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So we've used up all our time doing your introduction, so we're just going to have to say goodbye at this point. No, what an incredible career. I mean, you've been everywhere. You've done everything that the Air Force had to offer, really. Why did you leave? I mean, you don't have to, right? So why did you say it was time to hang it up?
Yeah, well, I tried to leave 3 times, so I figured the third time was a charm. But one of my final jobs in the Air Force, before I moved to the Air Force Academy, I was a group commander responsible for about 1,000 people throughout Central America, South America, the Caribbean. A lot of travel, a lot of time away from home, which was an incredible opportunity. And I absolutely loved connecting with my team, getting out and meeting them and walking around, getting to know them. But my husband was also an active duty Air Force officer at the time. He was responsible for the entire base down in Tucson. And we also have 2 boys who happen to be now 10 and 14, but at the time were 1 and 5. And it was a lot. We came to realize that our priorities were changing, the pressures were changing, the stress levels were changing. And we decided it was time to do something different, where we were a little bit more in control of our schedules. And I attempted to retire then, and the Air Force asked if I would stay and come back and be an instructor at the Air Force Academy, which to me, coming back was home for me. I mean, that's where I started my career. And so coming back there was a great opportunity to help influence the next generation of leaders. And stayed there for about 3 years. Again, tried to retire after 2 and asked to stay another year. And finally, after that third year, third time was a charm, actually retired. My husband and I retired at the same time, same ceremony. But it was really a family decision more than anything, and resetting our priorities and our boundaries as well.
I dreamed about early in my career leading a global business. I'm going to be a global business leader. This will be awesome. Well, your 16th trip to Tokyo, you're like, this is not all it's cracked up to be. And I had a very similar epiphany. It said, I can't keep doing this. If I'm going to do a family, I got to do something different. And it all worked out for me. So I totally hear you and understand why you might choose to do it. It's super great while you're doing it, but it has a price. It really does, particularly the global element of it.
Yes, it does. And it's a fantastic experience while it's happening. And even though you're exhausted, but I've realized through that, my passion and my purpose was really initially flying A-10, supporting our troops on the ground. That changed over time as I got to lead teams. But then my passion and purpose, at some point it changed, and I was able to put all of my effort and energy and passion into leading the next generation of our airmen, of our leaders, of our aviators. And that to me had value, and I was able to kind of find my new way.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's sort of what we do. We help people get better as leadership. Just for a minute, we have to touch on the A-10 though. It's too cool an aircraft not to talk about for a minute or two before we dive into the other stuff. So why A-10s, and what was sort of your why did you like them or not like them? What was your view on it?
Well, I realized early on during my days at pilot training, I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Like that was set for me. I decided that in the
Isn't
fifth
that what
grade.
everybody wants, right?
Well, surprisingly, no.
Uh,
But for me, I knew from the fifth grade on, I was going to be a fighter pilot. I didn't know what airplane I wanted to fly. And then I got to pilot training and I realized that I really enjoyed the low level flying. It was just fun. It was exciting. I thought the formation work was cool. You know, it was exciting to fly really close to another airplane. But to me, I love the low level flying. And then I started talking to other pilots about what they liked about their missions. And A-10 pilots, there was something unique. They were so passionate about supporting our troops on the ground, knowing that what they did every day made a difference in helping someone get home safely to their families. And I was like, that is a mission I can get on board with. And that was my choice to go fly the A-10.
Right. For those of you that don't know the A-10, it's low level. It's basically a gigantic cannon with wings, and it's designed to support the troops by clearing way for them and suppressing other opposing forces. And it is one of the most feared aircraft in the arsenal of the United States of America by any opposing force. But you didn't make it home one time, almost.
Almost, yeah, almost. Here I am. Yeah,
I guess everybody knows the end of the story, right?
Yeah,
She
well,
made
here
it
I
home,
am.
but
So I did make it home. But this is back. It's 20 years ago. It happened on April 7th, 2003. So we're at
oh my
almost the
gosh,
20-year anniversary.
Wow.
And that's part of the reason that I love the A-10. Why I'm passionate about the A-10 was that it helped get me home safely. And I happened to be over Baghdad, providing support to our troops on the ground when my airplane was hit with a surface to air missile. And I remember in that moment, like it was such a loud boom and bright red orange flash as this fireball envelops my aircraft. And then it just dumped over and I could see Baghdad below. And I think it was just instinct. I pulled back on my control stick and absolutely nothing happened. I mean, it was not responding to any of my control inputs. And, at this point, time is slowing down a little bit in my mind anyway. And I remember thinking, I do not want to eject. I mean, that's the last thing I want to do is eject over Baghdad. And I really fell back on my training and all the preparation that I had done, quickly trying to figure out what was going on in my aircraft. And I've got lights flashing everywhere. I've got a master caution panel that's lit up like a Christmas tree. I mean, it is just slightly overwhelming, but I have to focus on what's most important. And that is, how do I get this airplane under control? I quickly realized that it has lost all hydraulics. They dumped out when the missile hit the airplane. And so at this point, I know I either eject or I try to get the airplane in our backup emergency system. And thankfully, I flipped that switch. The airplane worked exactly as advertised, and I was able to slowly pull the aircraft and get away from Baghdad. And that was, for me, like the first moment I felt like I was going to make it out of there alive.
Wow. And yet you went back.
I did. Yeah.
That wasn't your last mission, right? I mean,
no, that
so
was
we're
one
gonna
of
have to-
many. I mean, I flew the airplane back for an hour. I was able to get it on the ground, which was obviously a huge feeling of relief. And let's say there was a lot of adrenaline in that moment. And the next day, instead of being tasked for a normal mission, I was tasked for combat search and rescue alert, which is another mission we fly where if an aviator is shot down, then we go and do everything we can to rescue them. Normally, when we're on alert, we sleep, we rest, it's downtime because this doesn't happen often. But this was April 8th, the alarm sounded, it wasn't a drill. An A-10 pilot had been shot down right in Baghdad, right where I had escaped my own shoot down. And for me, it was just that those guys were there for me the day before. I was going to do the same for this pilot. We raced out to the jets. We start gathering information. We make an immediate takeoff. I mean, I just didn't have time to think about it. It was just, how do we get there as quick as we can? And thankfully, he was very lucky. He got picked up by friendly ground troops. So we only made it about 30 minutes into Iraq. But, it was the whole idea that that's what we do for teammates.
Yeah. Now, is that the plane that you handed over to the Smithsonian, or the part of the plane you hand over to the Smithsonian?
It is.
Wow.
Unfortunately, that airplane never flew again. I was able to land it, but it was so badly damaged that they assessed that they couldn't repair it in the location that it was. So after they decided that, maintenance took every piece and part that they could out of it, but they also cut a piece of the back tail section for me that had the tail number on it. And it's been with me for 20 years. It's hung in every Air Force office I've had, but I recently retired and it held a place actually back behind me here. And the Smithsonian is doing a new exhibit on modern military aviation. They asked if I had anything, and I thought, what better way to share the story than that tail flash? So I delivered it on Tuesday to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. It will be there in a new exhibit. And I think, now the story and the lessons learned, which is most important to me, can be told to the next generation.
Awesome. So everybody go check out the Udvar Hazy Museum and you can see her wing number or tail number. So let's move over to leadership. You move from sort of being an individual contributor in the form of a pilot to leading people. And then now you've transitioned to teaching people how to lead people. So let's just roll all the way back and say, if you had to characterize your leadership approach, what would be the elements of your leadership approach, the teachable elements of your leadership approach?
Well, I think part of the reason that I wrote my new book, to me, I was trying to summarize it into one, how do you capture all of these experiences and lessons? And what I realized for me is that over the course of my career, I have experienced fear. I have experienced being nervous or stressed about flying airplanes, about leading teams. And to me, all it came down to was those feelings, those things are normal. They happen. It is all about what you do in the moment. It is about leading with courage. And so for me, this whole idea of courageous leadership and leading with courage, and how can you make those hard decisions? How can you make decisions when you don't have perfect information? How can you have the tough conversations that none of us like to have, but are essential and necessary? How do you hold yourself and other people accountable? How do you admit mistakes when it's really uncomfortable to do so? How do you get out and connect with your team? It all comes down to me to having the courage to do that, to do the hard things, to make those connections, to build an environment of trust. So the short answer is it's all about leading with courage.
I know you talk a fair amount about vulnerability, and I fully agree with that. I mean, you don't realize how intimidating you can be as a leader with a big title and a lot of experience and knowledge, and people get super intimidated by that, even though I'm just Kim or I'm just Jim or I'm like, that doesn't work.
Right.
And so I think the vulnerability comments you've made are really important. So maybe you talk about that.
Yeah.
Let me just add one element to maybe touch on the people that are incapable of being vulnerable. And we've all dealt with leaders that can't be vulnerable, right? What's going on there? So why don't you talk about vulnerability and maybe what's going on with people that can't get there?
Well, I'll tell you, my very first leadership job, I was responsible for about 150 military and civilian personnel. They had various backgrounds. I came in as this combat proven fighter pilot, and I had this idea that I needed to almost put on this tough exterior. And it was like I needed to have all the answers. And, I realized very quickly that is not what my team wanted. They wanted to meet me for who I was. And part of that happened because during my change of command ceremony, which is a very formal initial ceremony, my 3-year-old son decided he was going to come sit on my lap in the middle of the ceremony. And I mean, I was like, my heart is racing. Like, I'm just like, what is going on? What is my team going to think of me? I'm supposed to lead 150 people. I can't control my 3-year-old son. And then as I'm sitting on stage, there's an A-10 behind me and lots of people in the room, and I'm sitting on stage and I just have this realization that the reality is I need to let my team see me for who I am. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a fighter pilot, I'm a leader, I'm all of these things. And that is the human side of leadership. And after that happened, I was still very nervous, but in the next days, I took some time, walk around, talk to my team. And the one thing that came up in every conversation was how cool they thought it was that my son got on my lap, because to them, it made me human. I don't have all the answers. I have my own challenges. And that one moment taught me a lot about vulnerability and this idea that be authentic and true to who you are, and really take the time to create connections with people and build that environment of trust, because everything then can build from there.
Yeah. I think that experience is the same as everybody in their first leadership position. Now, I remember myself, I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to be
Yeah.
invulnerable. I wanted to be all knowing. I wanted to be, and I think when you get a little time in grade, you go, that's just not going to work. So great that you got there. Yeah, I'll just riff on this comment about invulnerability, which Lencioni talks about, and is sort of the opposite of what you're talking about. The people that are incapable of being vulnerable, it's actually a confidence problem.
Mhm.
Jim's junior psychologist hat, right? I mean, to be fair, it takes incredible confidence and courage to fall onto your thinking to be vulnerable. That's what's hard, not being invulnerable. Being invulnerable it's a little cowardly, frankly. So
Yeah, I think it absolutely takes courage to be vulnerable. It's hard to put yourself out there. And it's this idea that you want to have trust with your team, but someone has to start,
yeah,
especially when you're a new leader. And that person is you as a leader. You have to start and provide that vulnerability and engage with your team and trust your teammates. And in return, I think it builds trust. It creates connections. It allows your team then to be vulnerable because they feel like it is a safe space to do so. It means that they can now admit mistakes and feel comfortable about it. They can bring ideas up that maybe they wouldn't in the past because they feel like it's a safe space.
yeah.
I have seen it time and time again. The more I walked around and talked to my team and met them in small groups in their workspaces, things came up, ideas came up, connections came up, some things that we weren't doing well came up because
Mm.
there was this environment of trust, because I had been vulnerable with them and shared a little bit of myself with them. It just created space to create those connections.
So talk about connection, because this actually really did resonate to that idea. I used to say, as I ran a multinational company, I go, um, organizations of that scale are lubricated by beer. That was my comment, right? Which is the same thing as saying connection.
Yeah.
How did you generate connection? How would you recommend we generate connection? And more than that, how do you do it sincerely? I know maybe
Yeah.
that's feels like a weird question, but
Well, I think
hi,
one of the things that
Sally. No, go ahead.
yeah, one of the things that I realized in the fighter squadron and what made us, I think, unique and to be able to perform at a very high level is that we had these connections. We had built this trust, and it was built on this idea that we were all part of something bigger and more important than ourselves, but we each had a unique role to play. We trusted each other. We had full confidence in each other and our capabilities, but we also spent time creating those connections. A lot of them happened, you're right, over a beer on a Friday night, telling stories, telling, about the things that we did wrong, the things that we did right, and just having those conversations, but it built connection. So then how do you do that outside of that environment? And, I took those lessons that I learned as a fighter pilot. And the first time that I became a leader, it was 150 people. And to me, that was a manageable
Mm,
group where I could know, I would know people's names. I'd know a little bit about them and their families. Scale that up to now 1,000. Now I'm struggling a little bit because it doesn't work as well. They're also rotating out very frequently because it's deployed locations. And so, how do I do that? How do I create those connections? For me, every trip that I went on, every location that I visited, I might have a big discussion with the larger group as best we could, but I made sure that I took the time to just walk around and talk to people, go to their workspaces. And now I'm talking to maybe 5 or 10 or 2 people where they're more comfortable and we're having some conversations about life in general. Who knows? We could be talking about the weather or football, but we also would take some time to just teach me something about what you're doing.
mm,
Um, I'm a fighter pilot, so some of my airmen, some of the people that I was leading, they were doing things like fighting fires. I had firefighters underneath me. I had civil engineers underneath me. So when I went and visited my firefighters, I let them teach me how to fight fires. They actually suited me up in their gear and took me in the burn house with them. Totally uncomfortable from my perspective because I'm a fighter pilot and we don't like fires. Also, from an ego side, I was worried about potentially doing something stupid in front of my team. But the fact that I put myself out there really create connections. I had young airmen teach me how to drive a front loader. Not something I've ever done. But those small moments, right? Those small moments create connection. And in those larger organizations, word spreads. I mean, people hear about it. And every time I walked around, I gained so much from a connection standpoint, but I also learned so much more about my team.
Yeah, interesting. And there's actually good research on above about 250 people, the dynamics of leadership change.
Yeah.
You experienced it, but there's a company called WL Gore that organizes around this idea. When a facility gets over 200, they break it apart.
Hmm.
So you can always have that personal connection. They never want to get to that 1,000, I don't know everybody working with me environment. What did you find different in the leadership when you couldn't know everybody? You couldn't have a personal relationship with them anymore.
Well, I really tried. I relied on my squadron commanders. So we'll call
Yep.
them kind of in each location, we had somebody in charge. So the lower level managers, if you put it that way. But I really built connections with them so that we had an open and honest conversation about things that were going on. But still, I really tried, even though I couldn't take the time to get to know every individual
Yeah.
in the organization. I just built time in my calendar when I was traveling, because these were all in different locations around the world. I built time that was just, it was walk around, go see this team. And every time I tried to visit, I'd change it up so I could see different parts of the team, have them show me something, teach me something. That's really what I was trying to do, is just build those small connections where I could, but also make sure that the leaders that I had in place there were creating that same environment.
Yeah. Uh, you know, um, I think whether you knew it or not, you were using the informal network to deliver the same messages, right? So there
Yeah.
were, talkers, if you will, right, in every one of those groups that then communicated your message. You go,
Yes.
yeah, I was with the colonel, and here's what she had to say. Like, you're hanging out with the colonel. What do you mean? You go, well, um, one of the other things that I noticed that you talk about is the after action
Mhm.
and and building a learning cycle into the organization from, we did this right, we screwed this up, we could do this better, whatever it is. How, tell me about that, and also talk about how do you generate honesty, non-defensiveness in that
Yeah.
environment, because that's a really challenging environment, I think, for people.
Yeah, and again, I pull that from my time flying the A-10. I pull that from my time in a fighter
Mm.
squadron where, we're in an environment where it's high stakes, high stress, uncertainty, and performance is important, and how you perform in the moment is important. And after every mission, we sat down to have a debrief. It didn't matter
Mm.
how busy we were, it didn't matter. It was on the schedule. We would debrief every mission. And it was so important that we would spend the time, we would talk about our objectives, we would talk about the things that we did well so that we could repeat them. But then we would really drill down into the mistakes that we made and the lessons learned. And it was an environment where we would check our rank at the door, where we would check our ego at the door, so that we could sit down in that debriefing room and really focus on how to get better, how to do it differently the next time. When we talked about our mistakes, we drilled into the root cause. What was the root cause of the mistake? Sometimes we can do an easy blame an individual, blame something that's easy. But if we keep asking the question why, we can find that root cause. And then we derive the lessons learned, and then you've got to do something with those lessons. So it was all about, what was the fix? What are we going to do differently the next time? It was incredibly effective, and it only happened because we had an environment of trust where people could feel safe to provide feedback to senior leadership, to
Yep.
people that were in higher positions than them. And it worked well. It was an accountability environment where people could provide feedback. I then took that into my leadership teams, because I felt like if we ran a project or a big presentation, you name it, we could put in the work to prepare before we got there, but then we needed to debrief it. We needed to talk about it. Did we make mistakes? What did we do well? What are we going to do differently the next time? It's
Right.
all about creating that culture of accountability.
Interesting. Um, so let's translate now. You're no longer in a military environment, which has its own particular characteristics. Um, you're doing a lot of education in the business environment.
Mhm.
How do you see, or what does or does not translate from your military leadership experience into a business environment as you work with business leaders? Is it 100% translation? Is there some things it's not quite the same? Like what are the deltas and what are the things that work?
I think sometimes there's this idea that, well, how can we do that? How can we create that high performance culture when everything you do is based on lives are on the line.
Yeah.
And I understand that there is that dynamic, especially in combat and those experiences where lives are on the line. But I also think that when we look at the business corporate environment outside of the military, livelihoods are on the line, right? Every leader is responsible for people that are trying to put food on the table, that are trying to raise, save money for their kids to go to college. I mean, that is livelihoods. Those are important things. Yes, it may not be life or death situations every day, but it might be the fact that we're really focusing on people's lives and their passions, their purpose, their mission. And so I think sometimes we can sell ourselves short in terms of the importance of what we are doing every day. But this idea of creating a wingman culture is what I like to call it, where everyone feels like they're part of something bigger and more important than themselves. Is it life or death? No. Is it combat? No. But it is an environment where we want people to understand the role that they play in an organization. How do they impact the bigger mission? Taking the time to explain that, or at least have leaders at all levels be able to explain that, is, to me, incredibly important. So there are differences, but I think a lot of the ideas can still translate.
Got it. And maybe last question on sort of strategy development and execution, right? So you always had a plan when you went in to do something, and then what's the line? I'll use the Mike Tyson line. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the nose, right?
Yep.
Same thing. So all of a sudden the plan's now what? So you got this sort of, we're doing certain things. We got to realize that it's going to change as we go. How do you deal with that tight, loose, or loose model of planning and strategy? How do you deal with that? And I want you to translate it to the business environment, because we're all about, like, we got to do a plan. We're going to hit the plan. The budget is this, got to have, and stuff happens, right? So
Yeah. Well,
talk
I
to me
will
about
tell
that.
you, yeah, over flying for 20 years, I think I have over about 1,800 hours in the airplane and over 100 combat missions. And out of all that time and all that experience, not a single mission ever went exactly as according to plan, right?
Right.
Something happened in the middle of it. I mean, some were better than others, but something would happen that we would have this great plan, and then something would happen that would cause us to real time adjust and make changes. And I think that was the key, that we had to put in the work in advance so that when that plan didn't go like we wanted, we were able to adapt and adjust. Looking back, I think what it is it's a function of preparation. So putting in the work, doing the research. For me, it was studying my aircraft systems, studying enemies' threat systems, but it's all about doing the homework, right? For whatever we're doing in life, do the homework. What has or hasn't worked in the past? What are the objectives and expectations? And then it's about practicing. So putting in the work, and flying, practicing means either getting in a simulator or using a visualization technique to think about the mission, to think about the problems. Well, in the business world, we can do that by sitting down with our team and doing a team huddle. We can do a walkthrough of a negotiation, a presentation, a project, do a quick team huddle, discuss roles and responsibilities, think about the options, just walk through it, practice it. And then the last step for me, what was so critical is especially when I started getting anxious or worried, like, hey, this isn't going to go according to plan, there could be problems. Well, let's talk about them. Let's plan for contingencies. Let's talk about the things that could go wrong. We might as well talk about the worst case scenarios. And then we talk about what we are going to do, right? What are those tough questions that could be asked in that presentation or negotiation? What is kind of the worst case scenario? Let's talk about it. Have plan A, B, C, D. And then you're more comfortable, you're more confident going into it. We would go so far sometimes to create a red team, which is a team that is designed to ask the tough questions, right? They're not involved in the planning. They just come in at the late game to be kind of the devil's advocate, somebody that can say, have you thought of this? Well, what about this question? To me, that preparation, the practice, and then planning for contingencies meant that I was better prepared in the moment to face that stress, to adapt and adjust when the mission or life doesn't go as planned.
Got it. Awesome. Well, Kim, what didn't I ask you that I should have asked you?
Let's see. What are some great questions that I've been asked? I think everybody always has great questions about flying the A-10, but I think, a lot of times I think there's this perception, right, that fighter pilots are cocky or arrogant, or, there's this desire to always put on that front. And what I've realized, kind of the unique traits that make fighter pilots, in my view, the best ones that I've worked for, both as pilots, but also as leaders, is 3 traits. And that is humble, approachable, and credible. It's a concept that they teach at our weapons school. It's a concept that is taught to all pilot instructors in the fighter community. And it's this idea that we are most effective when we are humble, when we're willing to listen to our team, when we are approachable, when they can come to us and ask questions. And then credibility, a huge piece of it is we have to absolutely be credible in what we do.
Well, good. This is good stuff. Okay, maybe one last one. What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? I ski. I've got to find some way to go fast. So I ski. My kids love to ski. We live in Colorado, so we do a lot of skiing in the winter. In the summer, I love to get out and hike.
Nice. You had a great year for snow this year. So yeah.
Yep. We got 6 inches on the ground this morning, and kids are at home because it's a snow day.
All right. We're going skiing. Awesome. And Kim, your book is already available. We can get it if we want to on Amazon or our favorite bookstore.
It is Flying in the Face of Fear, a fighter pilot's lessons on leading with courage. You can find it Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your favorite bookseller. It came out on March 8th and it's been pretty exciting, I have to say.
Nice. That's great. And if people want more of you, where do they go?
Best place is probably my website, because there are links to everything, links to order the books, links to social media sites, and links to my email. So if you have questions as well, but it's Kim-KC, the letters KC-Campbell.com.
Cool. And we'll end on, what's the KC stand for?
Oh yeah, we forgot to get to that, right? KC is obviously my initials, Kim Campbell, but every fighter pilot gets a call sign, and mine happens to be Killer Chick.
There you go. On that note, we're going to end it. Kim, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you good luck with the book and your speaking.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.